I've gone through, and this segment's like a minute and a half or whatever. I've gone through and done the last like minute just so we can have the Quantize drums to track guitars to, and but I'm gonna do the first 30 seconds to kind of demonstrate my process on how I quantize drums with Pro Tools and Beat Detective. And as soon as this thing is done processing, I'll kind of go over that.
So what's it processing right now?
Right now I've done the quantizing. This is actually the fill and crossfade.
Okay.
Which you put everything in time. Sometimes it leaves little gaps of audio.
So you do this so it doesn't pop.
Exactly. It fills in all the gaps. And this is one of the reasons I think Pro Tools is a standard for drum quantizing. And I highly recommend Pro Tools over most other platforms that I know of anyway, because the Beat Detective fill and crossfade is more of a copy and paste type algorithm as opposed to with other platforms, and with Pro Tools Elastic Time. I'm sure some of you guys are familiar with that. It actually does a stretch and compress audio feature, which to me doesn't sound as good because you actually it can degrade the audio quality, make it sound a little different, and because the fill and crossfade feature of Beat Detective doesn't stretch and compress the audio, it sounds more natural. It's actually it's copy and paste, so it preserves. Say for instance, I usually record 24-bit, and it stays 24-bit. It doesn't stretch it down. To some other smaller size or anything like that. So, but it just finished here. I'm going to consolidate this just so we'll have it, and then I'll start from the very beginning, so you guys can see what I normally do from scratch. But this is typically done before, or I personally believe it's best done before the guitars and everything are tracked.
Why is that?
It's because that way you'll have perfectly in time drums to track guitars to. It saves time on the back end, and if the drummer, particularly Tommy, didn't do like any drastic push and pull, but some drummers are quite ahead or behind the click, and if the drummer is ahead or behind the click when he's playing, obviously all the guitars, all the vocals, the bass, and everything will be ahead or behind the click also. That you're just going to have to adjust all that too once you adjust the drums or perfect the drums more so subdivision wise and tempo wise. You're going to have to do that same thing to the guitars and the vocals and everything. Like a lot of times the guitars, if you've got a solid guitar player, solid bass player, good solid rhythmic vocalist, you can you won't have to quantize a lot of stuff. They'll have it closer because they've actually recorded with more perfected drums. So and it just saves time. But yeah, I'll start from the top here. Drum quantizing, can take a little bit of time. Even with Beat Detective, it usually takes me about an hour per 2 minutes of audio. Particularly with technical music. Now this is a straightforward rock song, so I can knock it out pretty quick. But when you have like crazy metal stuff with like 30-second note subdivisions, like the more hits, the more time it takes.
Yeah.
If they do a lot of progressive or dynamic stuff, like a lot of ghost noting or a lot of intricate hi-hat ride work, things like that, it's going to take more time. But use a good rule of thumb is about an hour per 2 minutes of audio. Now before getting into actually using Beat Detective or any of the tools to help you quantize, I think a lot of people need to understand what quantizing is and be able to do it manually. And this is how I started, because I started in 2001. I didn't even have access to the full version of Beat Detective at that time or whatever. So I had to actually just manually cut up each hit and put it on time. So I'm going to show you how to do that real quick. It's very simple, and it's basically with Beat Detective, it's what the computer's doing for you, is figuring out the subdivision. So
cool.
Is Beat Detective sometimes too accurate, where it sounds unnatural?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was going to talk about that. I'm glad you bring it up. Yeah, Beat Detective, like I said, usually, for certain styles, it's cool to make the drums kind of mechanical.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
Obviously, like if you're going for a more produced, futuristic sounding metal type of production, you can quantize it pretty hard. You can put it right on the beat, right on the perfect subdivision, and it kind of can sound cool. It sounds inhuman. It's kind of it's part of the goal with some projects. But obviously for this project or whatever, we want to preserve some natural some natural vibe or whatever, just a little bit of push and pull, so it's not completely gridded out and mechanical sounding. And there's a couple different ways to go about that. Obviously, I'm gonna start off with the manual setting. I'll show you how you can do this with Pro Tools, but I'll also show you how you can do this with the manual approach also. But I'll start with the manual. But as you notice here, okay, I've got one thing I always do. If people at home notice, I'm not actually working in grid mode. I'm working in slip mode, which and I do that for a number of reasons. Like as I mentioned before, I believe that I record everything in one session. So to work in grid mode in one session and to have a rigid tempo for the entire album can get, there's a lot to keep up with and a lot to really. The only drawback for recording an entire record in one session is that if you move anything, all the tempos after what you move kind of get messed up. Yeah. And I'm not sure why the tempo doesn't follow exactly when you move things or whatever, but it just doesn't. But then you have to. It's not a big problem. You can go back and just move the clicks to the appropriate locations and get it back to where you need it to be. But it's can save cost a little bit of time if you need that. But like I said, usually you don't have to have a rigid. Pro Tools doesn't have to know a rigid internal click or whatever, unless you're using a lot of program sequence material in the computer or whatever. And a lot of times when bands have that, they'll usually, in Tommy's case or whatever, he comes in with the stuff, already programmed out, like the backtracking stuff that he's not actually going to perform, and he wants just in the mix or whatever as layers. He'll have it programmed, and all the tempos will be determined and all that kind of stuff, and we can just drag it in, already quantized and everything. So it's usually not an issue.
What are some of those elements for you that you?
Well, there's a lot of electronic elements, especially with this project.
Just real subtle things that.
Well, there's some songs are strictly electronic songs. No live instruments. Yeah. So, obviously you take that approach a little differently than the live setting of recording. But
this song is different.
Yeah, and even there's a lot of rock elements with sequenced keyboard stuff over it, or even electronic drum beat behind a live drum beat. So everything has to be right on. Like you said, if you don't quantize that, a lot of that can get messy, and certain things won't show up in the mix that you want. And that's what I've really become to really enjoy is finding ways to make things pop in the mix and with electronics, and you can make up a whole part sound completely different just by utilizing that tool.
Yeah. Cool. So it's like I said, I mean, it's quantizing is one of those things. Like I said, it's become standard. We're accustomed to hear it, and there's lots of production reasons, just like Tommy mentioned, for having stuff
certain
in time.
bands. Obviously, I still think the live room setting works for a lot of rock, especially.
Yeah, if you don't have any hard sequence stuff that you need to do, and you're just in everybody's solid as players, you can just work really hard.
But I think a lot of people forget. You'll be a progressive metal band, let's say, and you want to do the live setting thing, which is hard with technical music and music that needs to be very jagged and everything on point. And it can, unless you have a huge budget and you can record for 6 months, it's kind of impossible.
Yeah, it's already takes a lot more time and work, as it is.
There's pros and cons for all of that.
Yeah, using these tools, like I said, and I want to point out also, I don't want to use these tools to cheat. I like to use these tools to save time and money and budget, and I think there's a responsible way to use all these modern tools. And some people are abusing things, doing the whole slow, recording slow and speeding up and things like that. You can get what sounds like a performance that is beyond human ability, or beyond the person, the actual engineer's ability. I don't personally engage in that kind of production at this point. And and things like with quantizing, I don't want to quantize something that just the performer's not going to be able to ever do, or would never be able to do. I want it to be representative of what's possible, like what they can do. So I try to as a producer, I try to make that a point when I'm talking to clients, because I get some clients who have written stuff beyond their ability, and it's pretty obvious they've written it beyond their ability. And if I feel like they can go home and practice it and be able to do it, I'll just, okay, you can't do it. Yeah, you can't do it right now, but that's fine. We'll fix it.
Yeah.
But just go home and practice it, because you're going to have to play this live. And I ask people, like, you're going to
I want to touch on that tomorrow when I talk about kind of the writing aspect of it. Is like, you really need to know your strengths and weaknesses. You know? I mean, obviously I'll go into more detail.
What you can do and what you can't do.
But yeah, don't think you're invincible. Because nobody's good at everything.
Yeah. Well, I think with Tommy and BT Bam, like I said, I mean, if they can't do something at the moment, they just practice it even before they come to the studio. Yeah. They get it down before they come. And a lot of people, they don't do that. They're just like, hey, this is cool. Let me write it in Guitar Pro and I'll learn how to play it later. And then they're like, wait a minute, I can't play this. And it's become a problem. But anyway, back to the quantizing real quick.
Yeah.